Hi, good day everyone. My name is Andy Ramdeen, and today I'll be doing a presentation on business continuity planning and disaster recovery planning. So, what is business continuity planning and disaster recovery planning? This domain is all about the business. We're not talking about infringements of security policy or unauthorized access. Rather, this is about making contingency plans for a business threatening emergency and continuing the business in the event of a disaster. For this presentation, we'll be focusing on four aspects of it: disaster recovery planning, the goals and objectives of disaster recovery planning, DRP, the DRP process, and a data process continuity plan. Disaster recovery planning. This is a comprehensive statement of consistent actions to be taken before, during, and after a disruptive event that causes a significant loss of information system resources. Disaster recovery plans are the procedures for responding to an emergency, providing extended backup operations during the interruption, and making recovery and salvaging process afterwards should an organization experience a substantial loss of processing capability. The primary objective of the disaster recovery plan is to provide the capability to implement critical processes in an alternate site to return the primary site and normal processing within a time frame that minimizes the loss to the organization by executing a rapid recovery of procedures. So disaster recovery planning is all about, let's say you have a business and fire burned down the business. You want to have like an alternate site. You could just go and perform critical business operations until you build up back your previous site or a new site to continue operations. The major goal of DRB is to provide an organized way to make decisions if a disruptive event occurs. The purpose of a disaster recovery plan is to reduce the confusion and enhance the ability of the organization to deal with the crisis. Obviously, when a disruptive event occurs, the organization will not have the luxury to create and execute a recovery plan on the spot. Therefore, the amount of planning and testing that can be done beforehand will determine the capability of the organization to withstand the disaster. The objectives of the DLP are multiple, but each is important. They can include the following: protecting an organization from a major computer services failure, minimizing the risk to the organization from delays in providing services, guaranteeing the reliability of standby systems through testing and simulation, minimizing the decision making required by personnel during a disaster. So with DRP, you always want to make sure you have everything set beforehand before a disaster occurs. So when the disaster occurs, you just have to take action and you don't have to be making decisions on the spot. The disaster recovery planning process. This phase involves the development and creation of the recovery plan. Here, we will be defining the steps we need to perform to protect the business in the event of an actual disaster. The steps in the disaster planning process are as followed: data processing continuity planning, planning for the disaster and creating plans to cope with it, and data recovery plan maintenance, keeping the plans up to date and relevant. So the whole process could be looked at in this image here, which shows first you have to form the disaster recovery team, then you will do a risk assessment. You will be prioritizing processes and operations that are vital to the organization, determining recovery strategies, collecting data, creating a plan, testing the plan, and obtaining approval. And this could be repeated as time goes along. Data processing continuity planning. The various means of processing backup services that are all important elements to the disaster recovery plan. The most common Alternate processing types are mutual aid agreements, subscription services, multiple centers, service bureaus, and other data center backup alternatives. Mutual aid agreements. Mutual aid agreements, sometimes called reciprocal agreement, is an arrangement with another company that may have similar computing needs. The other company may require similar hardware or software configurations or may require the same network data communications or internet access as your organization. In this type of agreement, both parties agree to support each other in case of a disruptive event. This arrangement is made on the assumption that each organization operations will have the capacity to support each other in a time of need. This is a big assumption, though. There are clear advantages to this type of arrangement. It allows each organization to obtain its disaster processing site at very little to no cost. However, there are disadvantages, and it should only be considered if the organization have the perfect partner, example a subsidiary, perhaps, or has no alternative disaster recovery. One disadvantage it is highly unlikely that each organization infrastructure will have the extra unused capacity to enable full operation for such during the event. The biggest flaw in this type of plan is obvious. If we ask what happens when the disaster is large enough to affect both organizations, a major outage can easily disrupt both companies, thereby canceling any advantages of this agreement might provide. So this mutual aid agreement is where you have two companies whereby have an agreement that they could provide an alternative site in case of a disruptive event that would benefit each other. So like says two telecommunication network company, they would have the same infrastructure so they could support each other. But what could happen, the flaw in this is that let me say there's an earthquake. Um, both companies could be destroyed, could suffer disruptive damages. So thereby the both companies would not have an alternative site. They would have no disaster recovery site in order to recover in case of a disaster. So that is the biggest flaw in this scenario. Subscription services is another type of alternate and processing scenario that is presented by subscription services. In this scenario, third-party commercial services provide an alternate backup and processing facilities. Subscription services are probably the most common of the alternate processing site implementations. They have very little specific advantages and disadvantages, as we will see. There are three basic forms of subscription services with some variations: a hot site, a warm site, and a cold site. A hot site is the Cadillac of the disaster recovery alternate backup sites. A hot site is fully configured computer facility with electrical power, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, and functioning file and print servers and workstations. The applications that are needed to sustain remote transaction processes are installed on the servers and workstations and are kept up to date to mirror the production system. Theoretically, personnel and/or operators should be able to work with a data restoration of modified files from the last backup and begin full operations in a very short time. This type of site requires constant maintenance of hardware, software, data, and applications to make sure that the site fully accurately mirrors the state of the production site. This adds administrative overhead and can be a strain on resources, especially if a dedicated disaster recovery maintenance team does not exist. The advantages of a hot site are numerous. The primary advantages is that the 24 availability as well as exclusivity of use are assured. The site is immediately available after the disruptive event. The site can support fan outage in a short time as well as long-term outage. Some drawbacks of the site are it is seriously the most expensive of any alternative, full redundancy of all processing components. It is common for the service provider to oversell its processing capabilities, betting that not all of its clients would need its facilities simultaneously. There is also a security issue at the website as the applications may contain mirror copies of live production data. Also, your website might be administratively resource intensive because controls must be implemented to keep the data up to date and the software patched. Next, we have a warm site. A warm site could be best described as a cross between a hot site and a cold site. Like a hot site, warm site is fully computer is a full is a computer facility readily available with electrical power, HVAC, and computers. But the applications may not be installed or configured. It might have file print servers but not fully complement of workstations. External communication links and other data elements that commonly take a long time in order to install will be present. However, to enable processing at this type of site, workstations will have to be delivered quickly and applications and their data will have to be restored from a media backup. The advantages of this site as opposed to outside are primarily as follows. Cost, it would be less than outside. Location, because this type of site requires less extensive control and configuration, more flexibility exists in the choice of site. And resources. Administrative resources drain is lower than with the maintenance of website. The primary disadvantage of a home site compared to a site is the difference in the amount of time and effort it will take to start production at the new processing at the new site. If extremely urgent critical transaction processing is not needed, this may be an acceptable alternative. And the last one we have is a cool site, and is the least ready of the three other choices, but is probably the most common of the three. A cool site differs from the other two in that it is ready for equipment to be brought in during an emergency, but no computer hardware, servers, or workstations resides at the site. A cool site is a room with electrical power and HVAC, but computers must be brought on site if needed, and communication links may be ready or not. File and print servers have to be brought in as well as all workstations and applications will have to be installed and current data will be stored from backups. A cool site is not considered an adequate resource for disaster recovery because of the length of time to get it going and all of the variables that will not be resolved before the disruptive event. In reality, using a cool site would most likely make an effective recovery impossible. It will be next to impossible to form an in-depth disaster recovery test with a parallel transaction process and making it hard to predict the success of a disaster recovery effort. There are some advantages to a cool site, however, the primary one being cost. If an organization has very little budget for an alternative backup processing site, the cool site might be better than nothing. Also, resource contention with other organizations might not be a problem, and neither will the geographic location be an issue. The big problem with this type of site is that a false sense of security could be endangered by having the cool site, but until a disaster strikes, there is no really way to tell whether it will work or not, and by then it may be too late. Multiple centers. A variation of the previously listed alternative sites is called multiple centers or dual sites. In a multiple center concept, the processing is spread over several operation centers, creating a distributed approach to redundancy and sharing of available resource. These multiple centers could be owned and managed by the same organization in-house sites or used in conjunction with some other sort of reciprocal agreement. The advantages are primarily financial because the cost is contained. Also, this type of site will often allow for resources and support sharing among the multiple sites. The main advantages is the same as the mutual aid a major disaster could easily overtake. The processing capabilities of the site also multiple configurations could be difficult to administer. And we also have service bureaus. In rare case, an organization may contract a service bureau to fully provide an alternative backup processing services. The big advantages to this type of agreement is the quick response and availability of the service bureaus. Testing is possible and the service bureau may be available for more than backup. The disadvantages of this setup are primarily the expense and the resource contention during a large emergency. Other data center backup alternatives. There are a few other alternatives to the ones we have previously mentioned. Quite often, an organization may use some combination of these alternatives in addition to one of the preceding scenarios. Rule in mobile backup sites. Contracting with a vendor to provide a mobile backup services. This may take the form of mobile homes or flatbed trucks with power and HVAC sufficient to stage an alternate processing required. This is considered a cold site variation. In-house or external supply of hardware replacements, vendor resupply of needed hardware, or internal stockpiling of critical components inventory. The organization may have a subscription service with a vendor to send identified critical components overnight and may be accepted for a warm site but not accepted for a hot site. And the last one is the prefabricated buildings. It is not unusual for a company to employ a service organization to construct prefabricated buildings to house an alternative processing functions if a disaster should occur. Not too different from the mobile backup site, a very cool site. And this brings us to the end of the presentation today, where we focused on business continuity planning and disaster recovery planning. In particular, disaster recovery planning, the goals and objective of DRP, the DRP process in detail, and data processing continuity planning. Hope you all enjoyed it. If you have any comments, please leave it in the comment sections. Thank you all for watching.